So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers for today. I'm here with Brother Joseph Rozansky. Joe spent 10 years in Brazil and another 10 years as the director of the OFM's International Office for Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation. And he spent many years working in the training program for young Franciscans in both Brazil and the United States. And I should mention that he also was the president of FI's International Board of Directors. We're also joined by Budi Cahyono. He's FI's International Advocacy Director, and he's our resident expert on all matters related to the climate and the environment. And he's taken part of 6 COPs, if I'm not mistaken. And finally, we have Igor Bastos. Igor is the director of the Laudato Si movement for Portuguese-speaking countries. He's a longtime advocate for environmental and social justice through different Franciscan initiatives in Brazil, and he's also a veteran participant in the COP. Finally, my name is Thomas Kleinveld, and I'm the communications officer at Franciscans International. Before we really get started, let me just reassure you that there will be also women in our delegation. You'll have a chance to meet them during the upcoming webinars, but for today, I'm afraid you're stuck with us. So, Budi, let's start with you. Looking at the poll, most people seem to think that COP either means Conference of Parties or the Commission for the Oversight of the Paris Agreement. Can you tell us if they're correct, and can you tell us what exactly will be happening in November in Belém?
So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And this is very timely opportunity for us to meet together. And I'm very happy that many of you responded correctly about COP. COP is indeed Conference of Parties. Conference of Parties of what? That's the question. So it is the Conference of Parties. When we talk about parties, mean state parties of what we call as UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a treaty among states that was established in 1992 during the Rio conference, it was a very important conference in which all the members of the United Nations agreed to establish conventions to address the issue of climate change. So it is very important framework that will address the issue of climate change on the common responsibility of all states in addressing climate change that we are facing now. Although it was established in 1992, but as we can witness, the issue of climate change is very much the issue of today. So it is very timely that we will be together in Belém, in Brazil, in which we will discuss some of the pressing issues among states so that we can try to find common commitment, taking concrete actions at all levels. So that's the key issues that we will be discussing in COP30 in Belém in November this year. So people often ask why a COP is important. COP is very important because it provides a structure for the international community to collaborate together in addressing climate change crisis. So it brings all nations in different parts of the world, almost all, let's put it in that way. And COP will help to build consensus among states, to share best practices, as well as to agree on collective actions on climate change. And as the result of the different discussion and negotiations, there will be some agreements, decisions that then will shape the national policies, as well as shaping the global efforts in combating climate change. So it is important because it is the international climate governance in addressing climate crisis. Perhaps there are some questions as well on what exactly happens at COP. So COP is a place where delegates coming from states are going to be there, but it's not only limited only by states, but there will also be civil society organizations, there will be indigenous peoples, there will be people's movement, and people like us from the faith-based organizations. And of course, there will be some formal negotiations among states, but there will also be some what we call as events or side events organized by either states, civil society, and other initiatives, as well as there will be exhibitions in which people can share the best practices as well as challenges on how to address the climate change. There will also be business representatives. So businesses are also very interested in trying to either contribute or trying to share on their role in addressing climate change. And of course, we can be very critical to the businesses, whether they are really trying to propose something that can be taken into account as addressing climate change, or they have their own interest in advancing their business ideas. So those are more or less the big picture on what is all about in this COP.
Okay, so right now we're preparing for the 30th COP, which means that they've been happening for 3 decades. The first one goes back to 1995. Budi, when was this first COP? Where was it? How did it come to be?
So again, this is very important questions because we have the COP30, but we need to go back again to the Rio conference or Earth Summit in 1992. I think Joe will be able to explain that from the Franciscan perspective. So in this 1992 Rio Summit, it was very important that finally we established we established this convention on the issue of climate change. And based on those establishment of the conventions, there are certain agreements among the states that ratify the conventions that there should be implementations and there should be yearly conference to see how the implementations of those conventions. So that's why in 1995, for the first time, the state parties to this Convention on Climate Change, Framework Convention on Climate Change, met in Berlin to discuss about the implementations. And then since then, almost every year, we have this COP that will take place in the member states of the UNFCCC. And normally it takes turn between the 5 different regions. So this time it's in the Amazon. Before it was in Azerbaijan, and before that it was in Dubai, and so on and so forth. So it takes place every year, in which we will see how the agreements are implemented.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just reminding everyone to go a little slow for the interpreters. Joe, would you mind explaining to us how did the Franciscans first get involved in these international climate mechanism, and how does this fit into the broader efforts of the Franciscan family to care for creation?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Franciscans throughout the world have worked with people at the grassroots since the founding of our order, of our family, over 800 years ago. In the early 1980s, Franciscan Voices suggested that we bring our message and commitment to the international community at the United Nations. The idea resonated with many Franciscans, especially those ministering with grassroots communities. We sought to give people a voice in their own future. These initial steps grew into the organization we know today as Franciscans International, where Franciscans could promote the core values of Francis and Clare: dedication to peace, to the poor, and to the planet. They also offered a container into which we could funnel our concern for our sister, Mother Earth, and our increasing awareness of the terrible damage humans have inflicted on our common home. As I was preparing the thoughts for today, it came to me, or what I began to think about was the creativity that we had as the Franciscan family in these early years. As I mentioned, it was in the early 1980s that we began reflecting on going to the United Nations. But at the same time, we take pretty much for granted nowadays, at least many of us, the existence of what we call offices of JPIC, Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. But back in the 1980s, that was still a relatively new idea. And so, together with this commitment to coming to the United Nations, the Franciscan family at all different levels was working at establishing justice, peace, and integrity of creation offices. In different places, they were named different things. But I think that was a really important part of our creativity as we work to address the social, political issues that we saw in our world. I don't have information on each and every congregation, but I know that we all worked hard to coordinate our efforts. So against this background, many Franciscans were inspired and roused by convocation of the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development, also called the Earth Summit. It was held in Rio de Janeiro. It was the first of many UN-sponsored conferences dealing with environment and development, and Franciscans became increasingly involved in these meetings and committed to organizing the family in response to the challenges raised. Numerous international Franciscan delegations were organized to attend these conferences. In 1992, Franciscans International, the OFM JPIC office in Rome, numerous national Franciscan entities like Sinfrajupe in Brazil, and many other Franciscans brought awareness of grassroots issues facing people throughout the world. We brought these issues to the attention of the delegates who were meeting in Rio. And then we committed ourselves to addressing these issues both nationally and internationally. Environmental justice became an organizing principle for the entire Franciscan family. A good deal of the work was promoted again through the JPIC offices of the family throughout the world, and also the general offices of JPIC for the different branches of the family, most of which were located in Rome. These concerns were taken to the Conference of the Franciscan Family, which is the group of the leadership of the different branches of the Franciscan family, and to Romans 6, which was the group of the JPIC directors for the different branches of the family. Franciscans became increasingly involved in the different UN conferences and in parallel forums and conferences dealing with similar issues. For example, Franciscans were present at many of the world social forums, again, where many of the same issues were being discussed. The family was very present in the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012. It was officially called the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. It sought to reaffirm the concept of sustainable development, which had been raised in previous conferences. Some of the important ideas dealt with were food security, water resources, energy, oceans, and cities. The conference emphasized the interconnectedness of these topics and the need for integrated approaches and solutions. Another important issue discussed was the green economy, which highlighted awareness of consumption and production patterns. The conference also called for international cooperation. Many of these topics were of interest to the Franciscans present, and an international Franciscan committee fashioned 3 directives which were shared with the family and promoted at all levels of our work. These 3 were: first, saying no to the green economy; second, calling into question the current model of development with special attention paid to mining; and third, it was a call for a change in our lifestyles. These 3 directives inspired many efforts in all branches of the Franciscan family. In 2021, Franciscans were present in Paris for COP21, where a legally binding treaty on climate change was adopted by 196 countries. The conference dealt with the question of limiting global warming and discussed financial support for developing countries. During the conference, once again, Franciscans from around the world sought ways to bring the concerns of those at the grassroots to the delegates who were meeting at COP21. The encyclical letter of Pope Francis, Laudato Si', published in 2015, helped to reinforce and strengthen our work for climate justice. Many of the themes in his letter are the same that we have been promoting for decades and coincide with themes highlighted in the UN conferences on the environment. We are currently celebrating the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si', along with the 800th anniversary of the Canticle of the Creatures. These 2 events offer us opportunities to recommit ourselves to this value, which is central to our lives as Franciscans. They can and should be an important element in our continued presence at UN-sponsored events like COP30 and in our essential work with all branches of the Franciscan family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. So it sounds, as Budi described, there is a long history of climate work at the United Nations. There is a long history where the Franciscans have been involved in that work at the United Nations. Yet if we look at the reality, if we look at the news, it seems that the news related to climate change is getting worse and worse. And I wanted to throw it to Igor. There have been, as Budi described, some landmarks. We've had agreements. We've had the Paris Agreement that I think a lot of people will be familiar with. I wanted to ask you, Igor, since the Paris Agreement has been signed, have there been any successes that we can look to? Where can we look to for hope or, yeah, for success?
No, thank you, Thomas. And yeah, as you said, when the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, and if I'm not wrong, that was the first time I've met Budi in person in Paris. Many of us believed it marked the end of a long road, but in fact, it was only the beginning. It gave us a framework and a shared global commitment to limit warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and aiming a more ambitious goal for 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, the articles of that agreement still need to be translated into real policies and programs in every country. That's why states continue to meet year after year to negotiate, to revisit the details, and to jointly assess progress. One important tool for that is the global stocktake, which tells us where we are and where we are headed. And sadly, Even if all countries meet their current pledges, we are still on track for a temperature rise of over 2.5 degrees Celsius. That's why 2025 this year is really important. It's the year when all countries must submit the new NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. And this time, we must demand greater ambition. And as Franciscans, we walk with the poor and with the earth, and we are not neutral. We have a prophetic mission and a huge responsibility. In the climate negotiations, there are three key issues that we are called to better understand and to follow. The first of them is the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. We work alongside others to ensure these commitments are not just technical, but ethical, reflecting historical responsibility, justice, and care for future generations. The second one is the non-economic loss and damage. Climate change is not only destroying buildings, it's eroding cultures, displacing people from ancestral lands, wounding spiritual identities. These are impacts that money cannot fix. That's why the Loss and Damage Fund must recognize and address non-economic loss and damage, not just what can be measured and mercantilized. And the third one is the just transition. This is a key topic, but this is still controversial. Too often, it's fair to say that it's about clean energy for the North and the cost of extractivism in the South. For us, just transition must mean equity, participation, and protection of communities, especially indigenous people and local populations. It must include social justice, ecological justice, and economic justice together. And just to finish, there are many risks, and the process is fragile. Many NDCs are still too weak, and since they are not legally binding, countries can change their priorities overnight. And worth, corporate influence continues all the time. So, as an example, at the Geneva Plastic Treaty negotiations this year, we saw how fossil fuels interests blocked progress, just as they do in climate talks and climate negotiations. They use their power to water down commitments, to delay actions, and to keep profits over people. And when we talk about all those topics, we can ask ourselves, so what do we do? And it's important to highlight that we are called to stay engaged, to show up and to speak out. We do this not just as citizens, but as Franciscans, as people of faith, as protectors of creation. And the Laudate Deo from Pope Francis reminds us there is no more time to waste. As we approach COP30 and the world turns the eyes to the Amazon, we must carry with us the voice of the earth, the voice of the voiceless, the voice of those who are never invited to the table. With humility and courage, we must walk beside them, because this is not only about avoiding collapse, it's about building a future where justice and peace can guide the way. And that future depends on what we choose and what we do today.
Thank you very much, Igor. I'll remind everyone again, you can leave us questions in the Q&A and we'll be happy to post them to the speakers. Before we move on, I have a question for both Igor and Joe, because you've both described the issues at stake, the history of Franciscans engaging in these issues. But in some ways, the world of Franciscans and the world of the United Nations seems quite different. It's a different language. It's diplomats. It's the church. Can you tell me what is it like to be in these UN spaces as a Franciscan? What strikes you as particularly different? Are there areas of overlap, and how can we approach the UN as Franciscans?
Well, I think I would say personally, I spent 10 years in Rome as the director of our OFM JPIC office. And a good part of, a significant part of my time was spent working with organizations like Franciscans International. And I think what I saw from the beginning, as we began to talk about our presence, especially representing grassroots peoples, um, it occurs to me that the issues are the same. And I think what we really were committed to do with our presence at the UN, in a sense, was to translate the grassroots language to UN language. And many people have been invited to Geneva and to New York to speak through the efforts of Franciscans International with the delegates at the United Nations. And again, I'm really impressed by the people that are inspired by us, because we can bring, we're in contact with the people at the grassroots, and we can bring their messages to the people at the UN, translate it for them, and then take what happens at the UN and bring it back to people at the grassroots. So I find that to be the really, really big, the important issue that we deal with. The issues are the same, but the way that we talk about them and we work with them maybe are different, and we need to make them available to one another.
Thank you. Igor, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, sure. So maybe just to add in this reflection, I think that it's really important to recognize that the work in the different levels, the global level, the national level, and the local level, are on the same level of importance. All those activities and those actions are important. So, just as an example, when we have the negotiations at COPs, so for example, we have the expectation on COP 30, for example, when we have the civil society mobilizing in the grassroots and in the national and local level, there are ways that we can influence the negotiations. So in Brazil, for example, again, this year we'll have the People's Summit, where they are engaged, they have their own calls to actions, and this movement and this coalition has its channel to have some pressure at the Brazilian government. So when we identify the different levels and the way that we can better connect, I think that's a way to recognize our mission, and that's the way to recognize how important it is to be engaged in this processes. So as Joe Rosansky already shared as an example, during Rio Past 20, the Franciscan delegation were there, and I was glad as well to be there in Rio. And the Franciscans created a kind of a final statement that guided the work for the next years. And the most of the topics that they decided that was a priority for the Franciscans, in fact, was some really important topics to address in the future. As an example, mining was one of the priorities. And then we saw all the issues related to mining all over the world, and also especially in Brazil, as we had like Mariana and Brumadinho, and then all of other topics that we can see. So this is an example that sometimes the process looks like so far from our reality, but in fact it's closer than we think. So I think that's the point, and I turn back to Joe.
I just wanted to add, Igor reminded me of this. One thing that we learned in our work, we were constantly asking ourselves, how can we do things better? And we were working with lots of people in individual countries, but especially in the mining issue, we began to see how it was beyond national questions. The companies were working at an international level. And what we began to do was to put different country groups in touch with one another. And I think that was another big part of our work. You know, the communication between different groups and finding ways to address the issues that were transnational. And I think Igor pointed that out, and especially in mining, but in other issues as well, we began to try to put the international level together.
Thank you. I'm getting a question from Mary in the Q&A that I'd like to ask to Budi. She's asking, how do we translate those grassroots languages to the UN language? And is there a risk that their messages get lost in such a translation?
Thank you for the question. Hello, Sister Mary. Semoga sehat-sehat. I've known Sister Mary very much, quite long time. We worked together on the issue of trafficking in Singapore. So I'm very happy that Sister Mary is here. And your question is indeed very relevant to our discussion, because often when we have the so-called international agreements, there is always a challenge on how to translate these international agreements, these UN languages, into something that is doable at the local level. So it is very important indeed. And it is our responsibility as Franciscans, and also us as Franciscan International, in really trying to translate those big words, big policies into something that we can do at the grassroots level. In our view, in our experience as well, we can do it with challenges, but we can do it by working together with the Franciscans. As Franciscan International, we try to become the bridge between the communities and the UN, and back from the UN to the communities. I'll give you the example on what Igor and Joe just mentioned regarding the issue of mining. Mining was an issue that was raised by the Franciscan network since decades. And we understood that the issue of mining is not individual issue in a specific country, but it is an issue that is global. And we try to understand that by addressing on the fact that the system that we have is not the system that is suitable for us. We understand that the resources have been used in a certain way without having the benefit to the community, and in addition, violate the human rights of the community. So for that reason, based on our collective experience, we are now lobbying at the UN on the importance of having legally binding instrument on business and human rights, so that the businesses, the corporations, have the responsibility and are accountable in their human rights conducts. And now we are translating to the UN, but at the same time, we are also working very closely with several Franciscan communities in trying to understand the impacts of mining on people. And we are trying with the Franciscans at the local communities, such as the Franciscans in Mozambique, the Franciscan in Solomon Island, the Franciscans in Guatemala, so that we can change the policy at the national level together with us in trying to, let's say, improve the legislation, improve the situations at the local level. So those are concrete examples in translating the UN languages into something that is more or less doable at the grassroots level.
Okay, thank you very much, Budi. I actually would like to bring it back to the COPs again. We're getting a few questions about how people can engage and how people can participate. And I think it's important to recognize that most of us won't be able to go to Brazil. And most of us won't be there physically in Belém. Igor, you've told us it's important to stay engaged in these COPs. Also acknowledging the reality that most of us won't be there. What can people do to support the efforts of those that will be at COP remotely?
No, thanks, Thomas. And I think that in this journey towards COP30, we are doing kind of a first step on this. So first of all, I really think that it's really important to better understand the system, to better understand the negotiations, the role of each country, the role of civil society. In this way, we can be prepared for all the other work that we could do. The second issue that I would like to highlight is that even if this is a global commitment, the real concrete actions are at the national level. So we have global commitments, global meetings and discussions, but each country has its responsibility to take action. So for this reason, and I believe we have people from different countries here, it's really important to make sure that we understand the system, we understand the commitments, and we can organize as people to take action and to try to influence our governments. I think this mobilization called People Summit is an example, but we have other examples in other countries. So in Ecuador, for example, the civil society organizations organized a kind of, it's not a petition, but it was a process to hear the communities about new mining projects in the country. And then the most of population voted no for that. That's just one example in a country that we can connect to how important is the civil society organizations mobilizing at the national level. So there are some other countries. So for example, some countries in Africa, they are mobilizing against the oil industry and I don't know exactly in English, the oil duct to transport oil fossil fuels. They are also mobilizing around that. There are a lot of mobilizations around just transition as well in many different countries. So in this space, as Franciscans toward COP30, we have a journey that we are inviting you to be with us. But of course, the concrete action that each one can do is based on the reality or the work that maybe you are already doing or the context in each country. But it's important to see maybe as an example what other Franciscans are doing, but also other organizations. So we have other faith-based organizations always engaged as well in the processes. We have other civil society organizations, the biggest one, but also small ones in different countries. So for me, those are the steps, like better understand and then identifying the best way to take action depending on each reality and context.
Thank you. And I think there's also calls and movements like this coming from the Catholic Church, which is something we'll dive in during our third webinar when we look at the call to action by the bishop conferences in the Global South. Budi and Igor, for both of you, because you've been at these conferences, can you think of an example where there has been a petition or a social movement where you could feel it had an impact on the negotiations?
So thank you very much for that question. Again, if we go back again to Paris Agreement, for example, in the Paris Agreement in 2015, there was a very strong push of human rights language within the Paris Agreement, in which we are really trying to ensure that any climate actions taken by states should respect the human rights, should respect the rights of indigenous people, and should be within the frame that it is the obligations of the states. And as a result, we do have a human right reference in the preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement. That's one example. The second example, Igor talked about the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage is very much felt by the countries that contribute less to climate change, but impacted negatively the most. A concrete example is that we are working with some Pacific states, Solomon Island, Vanuatu, Kiribati, etc., in which they bring the concrete daily impact of climate change to their life. The rise of sea level, the fact that they lost their islands. And we think that this issue of loss and damage has to be part of the attentions of the international community. And because we work together among the people, as well as with states that are impacted, now we at least have what we call as fund for responding to loss and damage. And then, therefore, we collectively also push the importance of non-economic loss and damage. Not that everything should be measured from the financial perspective, but there are certain important things like cultural identity, the issue of livelihood, the issue of right to life. So those cannot be measured by money, but it's important to be the attentions of the international community.
Thank you. So we're still about 3 months away from COP30, but one of the things to bring us together and to work toward collective action that we already could do and like to do is start a prayer chain. We also have Blair Matheson on the call. He's FI's Executive Director. Blair, would you mind telling us a little bit more about this initiative? And
thanks, Thomas. As Thomas has said, we're very keen to have more than just the delegation to COP30 in Brazil involved in COP30. And as Franciscans, we're well aware of the call that we have to prayer, whether it be reflective prayer, prayer on retreat, corporately in a small or a large group. It is a Franciscan calling. And so that's one of the reasons why you will all receive an email from us inviting you to be part of that. And we will send regular emails with specific topics that you can pray about prior to COP, during COP, and after COP30. Prayer is like an overarching covering or blanket, if you like, of God's presence. And so that, of course, is one of the key reasons why we have this focus on involvement through prayer. It's a way of constant participation, starting from now all the way through. Because the other thing we're very keen about is that COP30 does not finish on November the 21st or 22nd. The work of COP30 we want to take from 2025 well through into the next few years, and we will be developing a plan around that, which will require ongoing prayer, action and activities from all of us as Franciscans. If you'd rather not be involved in that, please feel free to come back to us, respond to the email and just ask for your name to be removed from that list. Otherwise, we will take it that you are happy to be part of that prayer involvement and cover for COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. We still have a few minutes on the clock, and I'm looking at the different questions that we're getting. I think a red line in the questions that I'm seeing is where to look for resources and where to look to build networks and to build collective efforts. I also see Ruth pointing out that, for example, in the United States, there is now a government quite hostile to this kind of movement and these kind of climate actions. One of the things we're trying to do at Franciscans International by hosting these webinars, by organizing activities before and during COP, is to create some of these networks. I'll ask an open question to all the speakers here. If people are inspired by this webinar, if people care about these issues, what are some of the immediate next steps they could take, especially if they're living in a country or in an environment that might be hostile to the very message of care for creation that we're trying to carry forward?
Perhaps I can respond briefly. I try to be brief and try to speak slowly. Franciscan International has been in touch with Franciscan Action Network in the United States and trying to see on how we can work together despite the fact that the current administration is not really facilitating or supporting our progressive agenda in terms of climate change or environment. We've been informed that there are some initiatives at the state level on the issue of green amendments. Green amendments means that efforts to adopt some legislations at the state level that are really taken into account the importance of protecting our environment. So I understood that there are some efforts being done between now and the coming years. So this is one of the creative way, let's put it in that way, that we can also work at the grassroots level or at the state level. Working or addressing climate change does not necessarily that we have to differentiate between the work at the grassroots level, the work at the national level, and the work at the international level. I think Joe and Igor have mentioned that quite clearly, that we, each of us, can try to do something at the a level in which we can contribute. There was also questions regarding how can we mobilize the young people, for example. FI, in collaboration with the Jesuit and some other organizations, are also doing a campaign together in which we try to provide information, but at the same time contributing in our own way in really pushing the state to have more ambitious climate actions. We can share those resources later after the webinar, so that we can also see how we can contribute at the personal level, or at the school level, or at the infra level, or at any other level. So there are different ways. And we should also think about not inventing the new wheel. we can also see other initiatives that are taken by other organizations, and we can join them. And I think this is also a way to strengthen the collaboration with other initiatives.
Just following up on what Budi just said, it seems to me that we need, one of our biggest challenges has been to sustain our efforts because, you know, the issues are so large. So I think what Budi just said, trying to work together with other organizations that are doing things helps to sustain our own energy and our own efforts. I'm concerned that we almost always have new initiatives. I think something like Laudato Si, it should be a touchstone for us that helps to guide our principles and our action. But it's something that continues to happen, and we don't just jump from one thing to another. So I would say sustaining the efforts are really, really important. And then we need other people that are interested in these things. And that's part of what this whole webinar is about, trying to create an atmosphere where people will work together at things that we believe in.
Igor or Blair, do you want to come in? That's okay. Because I'm also looking at the clock, and we're running already toward the end of our meeting. So I'm afraid this might be all we have time for today. We've gone through a lot of information, but there's even more that we haven't been able to cover during this conversation. You've heard Igor refer to certain concepts such as just transition, non-economic loss and damages, the NDCs, and these are all things that we'll dive into on 16 September, the same time. So we hope that you can join us then as we carry this discussion forward. You'll find a link in the chat. You'll also receive an email after this call that both will contain a link to the registration form, but also a folder that we created where we'll try to put some of the resources and the guides that we have available so that this will be accessible to you as well. Finally, before I actually close, I want to acknowledge two brothers that you haven't seen today, but that you might have heard today. Brother Faustino and Brother Francisco generously offered to help out with the interpretation. We haven't made it easy for them, so I want to offer a big thank you to them as well. There are some members of the delegation that will travel to Belém in our audience, and we will ask them to stay around for a few minutes as we carry this call forward with them. If you're not part of that group, this is where we'll say goodbye for today. I want to thank you very much for being here today. We'll hope to see you again in the next meetings. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being here, and we'll hope to be there in September. We'll hope to see you there in September. A big thank you to our panelists, and that's it for today. Thank you.